CS196. Just double checking the audio is fine. Okay, so sorry about that, guys. Welcome back to CS196. Today we are going to be covering Django. So, Django is a really powerful web framework that uses Python alongside web technologies to create really powerful web apps. And we're going to talk about how we can use this in our own apps and basically give you the fundamentals to how we can use Django. Alright, so our objectives for today. So first we're going to go over what is a web framework, then we're going to go over what is Django, some example Django sites, the model view controller process, including model view template process, the Django setup, a super duper quick overview of web technologies, the Django project structure, and finally, dynamic hello world. So what is a web framework and why should I care about this? Well, web frameworks are software frameworks that we use to help us make web applications like web services, web resources, and web APIs. But why should we bother learning how to use Django instead of just using it regularly? So security. Popular frameworks have the benefit of large communities which can quickly find bugs. They're efficient. You can rapidly develop applications by utilizing ready-made functionality. And you can also do this without having to rewrite hundreds of lines of code because developing the same kind of web app is pretty repetitive. A lot of the things that you utilize over and over again, like a front-end, back-end, controllers, etc. URL mapping is really easy to keep track of multiple pages, and especially with large projects, it's very easy to index them and make them all easily accessible. And cheap. The most popular frameworks are free, and you can develop faster. And time is money, so the faster you can develop, the more money you save. Finally, large community support. Extensive documentation, a support team, community forums, etc. All this provides loads of support that can make learning super easy. Like you put anything to YouTube, you'll find amazing tutorials there. So Django is super popular and it's used a lot, so you can find great resources for it. But what is Django? So I can describe it better than the Django website did, so let's talk about it. Django is a high-level Python web framework that encourages rapid development and clean, pragmatic design. Built by experienced developers, it takes care of much of the hassle of web development so you can focus on writing your app without needing to reinvent the wheel. It's free and open source. And notice, that's something we say all the time. We don't want you guys to have to reinvent the wheel or repeat stuff over and over again. So, web framework is a collection of packages and modules which allow developers to make web applications. And of course, it's ridiculously fast, very secure, and scalable. So regardless of the size of your website, it will still be just as good, to some extent. But who actually uses it? I'm sure this might be the first time a lot of you have heard it. Well, just a couple random websites like Instagram, YouTube, Spotify, and many others. Admittedly, Instagram and Spotify are usually used by apps, but think about how many users use Instagram daily and how much data has to be scraped into one app. The fact that Django is so scalable means Instagram can use Django and have no issues with all these people. Do you guys make slides yourselves? Yes, we do. Make all our slides ourselves. So you're excited? Let's cover some basics and get right into the code. So what is the model view controller MVC design? So it's a software design pattern used for developing user interfaces. The program logic is split into three interconnected elements. So this level of abstraction is done to separate the backend from what is used by the user. And abstraction is something you hear a lot about in computer science. There's a famous quote that any problem can be solved with enough levels of abstraction. Essentially, we want to separate things out, and so we don't have to work with the nitty-gritty every single time. So there's a YouTube video that explains this really well. I took the images from there. So let's say you get a request. And just to go over what we have, MVC stands for Model View Controller. Let's say you get a request from the user. That goes to controller. The controller is really useful because it handles request flow and it makes sure that nothing else has to handle user input. So if the user enters something stupid, or tries to put SQL injection code in there, it'll handle all that. It then sends the data or information or request to the model. The model handles data logic and interacts with the database. So all data-related things happen with the model. This is good because the controller, this thing that handles user input, doesn't have to deal with data, and it's all separated out. We abstract away its complexity. We then get this information back to the controller, which passes it to view. And view, like the name implies, handles visual information. It handles data presentation and is dynamically rendered. So pass that data over and shows them what they need. This is passed back to the controller, who gives this back as a response to the user. And I want to focus on this word here, dynamically rendered. So imagine you open up your bank account. Your bank account is the same code for everybody, but it's not going to show you my account balance. It's going to use somebody else. It's going to show you your account balance, not somebody else's. Dynamically rendered means that regardless of who's using it, we can get data dynamically and create dynamic pages, which is very powerful and used by pretty much most websites nowadays. But there's so many steps. Isn't this even more complicated than regular web development? Well, yeah, there are definitely more steps, but you can by separating all these steps to distinct stages, we can break up our large groups or teams to handle things separately, but still create one final working app. So the model, as I said before, handles all data logic, storage, retrieval, logic, etc. The view handles all visual or UI components. It uses data received from the model, so from the controller, so model controller back to the view, to display information to the user. And finally, the controller handles all user interaction and then sends commands to the model or view to update based on user input. Especially when working on larger projects, this makes development much easier and more robust. But if you did some Googling, Django is MVT, Model View Template. So why are we teaching about MVC? Well, a lot of popular frameworks are based or use MVC. So AngularJS, Ember.js, Rails, etc. And Django's MVT pattern is similar enough to the MVC pattern to be called MVC. The only difference is the controller is handled by the framework itself. It's making your life even easier. And we use templates, which use static HTML and CSS coupled with special syntax to create dynamic elements. So if you're familiar with creating a website, we use HTML and CSS to make static web pages. But with Django, we have additional syntax that makes them dynamic using the model and view ideology. So Django, let's get right into it. So a lot of this content I adapt from these two resources, the documentation and this online tutorial. Great resources if you ever get stuck. So important note regarding frameworks, libraries, etc. And we will come back to this a lot. Read the documentation. Please, please, please read the documentation. Most of the answers you're looking for can be found there, and much of the extra content is taken from there. So all your answers are there. It's written by very, very intelligent people, and it's very, very easy. The Django documentation is very clean and easy to use. And I linked it again, so in case you need to look for it. So setup. The easiest way is to just use pip. And if you remember from last lecture, Sammy covered pip excellently. And if you set it up properly, you just have to do pip install Django, and you'll be set. That's all you need. And there's more info there on the website or from the documentation on additional ways to get it. Like you can get it from Git directly or etc., etc. I'm not gonna get into it because you should just use pip. It's the easiest way. Once you have Django downloaded, you can run this command to see whether Django installed correctly. And if you're having a planning a database, which we will cover in the next lecture, then we have to make sure that we have a backend for that, or backend software. For this class, we're going to use basic MySQL and use that with Django. You don't have to know SQL, but we'll cover very basic commands. It's actually very, very simple to run SQL because it wasn't designed for programmers. It's designed for people without a technical background. So we can cover that pretty quickly. And there's the MySQL documentation with a little space there. And note, some people recommend setting up a virtual environment before starting a project. This doesn't affect how the project actually runs, but it does make it easier. For example, if you update one of your dependencies, like you update Django, but you didn't update something in the app, that you only use the same version of Django. A virtual environment is basically you install packages and stuff there, and when you run programs from there, it'll use whatever you installed initially. It won't get updated with the rest of the computer. What's a virtual environment? Yeah, so basically when you create a virtual environment, it lets you download packages and install, use pip to download things that you would need, but it won't affect the rest of the computer. So for example, if on your local machine you decide to update Django, whatever's in the virtual environment won't get updated. So if you run Python code from within the virtual environment, it'll use whatever you downloaded when you were inside the virtual environment. It won't take it from the rest of the computer. So let's say you're on a big machine and somebody else updates Django, but your code hasn't been updated to handle this new version of Django, it'll crash. But if you continue to use your virtual environment, it'll work fine. You don't need to do this. It's really only for like large-scale apps or something you look at for years and years and years. So Let's create our first Django project. So this is optional step 0. You can create an empty project folder using mkdir and then cd into it. But the way we actually do this is we run this command, Django admin start project and the project name. Now Django will create our project for us in the folder with project name. And technically we can say the project is created here, but we're going to do a few additional steps. And I will do all of this for you guys, so you'll have a proper demo. We cd into our virtual folder, and you see two things there, a file called manage.py and then another folder with the name project name. And to check that everything's running properly, you can also use this command to start running your project. And then we should be able to go to this address. This is localhost on port 8000. So this here is our localhost, and port 8000 is the port that we use. So let's actually just do that. Gonna hide myself. Okay. Let's see to the desktop. And now we're gonna run Django. It's lagging. If it's lagging, say refresh your Twitch. Django admin start project. And let's call it CS196. And notice that we created a new folder here. And this folder here has the CS196 folder and the manage.py folder. So let's cd into there and run Python. So I use Python 3 because I have both Python 2 and Python 3. So I have to specify which version I'm using. Manage.py run server. And all these commands are on the slides. Okay, so now we can go to this address here. Paste that into Google, or not Google, into our browser, and we got the screen. So our install worked successfully, and we know that Django is installed and it's working properly. Now we can start developing our app. It also links us to the documentation, very important, and a few tutorials and stuff. Cool. So let's just hide this for now. So why do I need to run server after the Python command? It's a great question. The reason we have to run server is because Django is a server-side app. Essentially, it's designed to be run on large servers. So when you want to test it, it'll emulate a server locally to host your app on. That way, if you have things like a backend database, all that can be hosted properly and work properly when you're testing it. Good question. So now you see this. Now let's take a step back, and how does a regular web app work? Let's discuss how regular web apps work. Okay, so it's a lot of information here. You don't need to learn all of this. It's just good to have a good understanding about this. So with static websites, we use 3 languages, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. HTML is a hypertext markup language. So markup languages help us create pages that are displayed on the web and just tell us where things have to be. It's very, very simple, and it's just for telling us how we want to display things. CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets, which we use to describe the presentation of markup languages like HTML. Basically just makes things look pretty. Finally, JavaScript allows us to do client-side scripting to create dynamic pages. So all things like animations or user input, fun stuff like that, will be handled using JavaScript. Static websites are websites that show the same thing to everybody. Kind of basic. We're not going to cover that because we want to use modern technology to create dynamic websites. And these are great because they can be tailored to the user, updated with new information. Django and other frameworks make it really easy to create dynamic websites, and our template will use HTML, CSS, and JavaScript with the additional Django dynamic functionality. Okay, so back to Django. So I'm going to quickly go over the file structure of what we have. So if we go back here for a second, let me make this bigger. It's not letting me make that bigger. Okay, so if I open this up, notice that we have a bunch of files in here, and we have this manage.py. So let's go over what they all do. So this is the root directory that Django creates, and this is whatever the project name is. And inside that, we have all our other files. So first I'm going to talk about manage.py because this is very, very important. This is the command line utility which lets you interact with your Django project. And we'll definitely come back to this because of many things we do apart from just running the server. Someone asked if we're going to have to relearn HTML, CSS, JavaScript. To some extent, yeah. If you're building any web app, you will have to do that. Then we have the actual Python package for your project, and you'll use this name when you're trying to import anything for your project. So notice the project name appears twice, so this folder has the same name, but this isn't like the entire project. This is the package. So if you want to import anything from here, you have to take it from you. So if you remember from Sammy's package and libraries lecture, libraries are like packages. You can import stuff from there. This is an empty file, init.py, but it just lets Python know that this directory can be treated like a Python package. Settings.py, this file stores all the settings and configurations for our project. Very important, we'll come back to this too. URLs.py, this is super, super important. I know I keep saying everything's important. It's because all of this is really relevant. This lets us do our URL mapping. Think of this as a table of contents or as an index, that's a better word for it, for all our pages. We will be talking more about this because this is how we can link all our pages together and access our first page. This is not that important. Once you're finally deploying your site, we use WSGI. It stands for Web Server Gateway Interface, and it's a standard for how web servers communicate with web pages. So you only need this when you're deploying it. Don't worry about it too much. I personally have not used this. I've been able to deploy it just fine using everything else. Okay, Kahoot time. Oh, let me jump out of here. We'll skip through this real quick. Congratulations, the top 3. Okay, back to the lecture. I just want to jump back here for a second to show how this links to how MVC links to Django. So the way this works is, imagine the controller is being taken over by Django. Now we only have MVT. So view and templates go hand in hand. What the template is HTML code and CSS with a few of Django's special syntax added to it. What view does is it takes this template, adds all the dynamic elements where the special syntax is, and presents that to the user. So controller is handled by Django, we still have a model, still have a view, but we have this extra template over here, the imaginary box there, that view takes over and displays these beautifully designed websites. So I hope that makes a little more sense. All right, so cool, we did it, our website looks great, but it just looks like this. This isn't what we want, it doesn't have anything actually relevant or useful. I'm also gonna hide my face so you guys can watch the lecture better. So let's create a dynamic Hello World page. So how do we do this? So notice that in our current file directory, there's no models, views, etc. And this is because we haven't created our application yet. So let's create a Hello World app. The way we do this is in our terminal we run Python manage.py start app and then the name of our app, which we'll call Hello World. This creates a Hello World folder, which will be our application, and this is within the root directory. So next in this folder, we want to create a urls.py, and this helps us index all our pages and provides relevant mappings to all these pages. We want to be able to identify all our different pages using this, and it's very important. So let's go do that right now. And I can come back on screen. Would you use Python 3 if you have multiple installed? So I have Python 2 and 3 just because some of the things, libraries I use are deprecated and they're old. So I have to use both, and I use Python 3 to specify. Okay, so now we want to do Django admin start app hello world. And if I pull this up again, we have a new folder here, and this folder has everything that we want. We have the models, we have the views. Let's make the urls.py. So let's cd into that file and create urls.py. Oh, not there. Cd into hello world. All right, let's bring that over here. Okay, let's talk about what this has to look like. So we want to have these main things here. So firstly, we want to import path, this path function, which just highlights what the path to the URL should be. We want to import views from the current folder because the views will render this page. And we want to have this URL pattern here. So let's just copy that over. So when the URL has nothing on the end, so nothing is like just here, which home pages usually do, we want our view to run the home function. So let's add this all in. And I want to show you guys the original url.py. So this is what it looks like. We want to create something very similar. So this is our hello world url.py, and this is the CS196 url.py. My video got unsynced. Oh, sad. All right, I'll take it off for now. So we want to have import, what was it? Django.url's path. No, it's from, sorry, let's go over the slide first. I want to do from Django dot import the path and the views. So great question, Eugene. I'll get right back to that very shortly. URL patterns equals, and we want to have just the empty path with our views.home. So path, empty path, because if you open up with Google and there's nothing at the end of it, like it's just a slash, then that knows we know we're at home. So views.home, and finally we want to get name equals home. So views.home indicates that in views we want to run a home function to run this, to render this app, and we have our home. All right, let's check that. That looks good. We should match that. Yep, I'm gonna put a comma at the end there. Cool. So we did import views, and we're calling views, but we haven't done anything in it yet. So let's get our views in there. What do we want to do in views? So in views, we want to create this home function. So notice in urls.py, we're calling views and running this home function. So what should this do? Well, we want to create this function to go home. So it'll take a user request. We get the request from the controller, from the user, and then we return an HTTP response. And this is the message. And notice that we have to include this up here. So let's write this in, and then we'll see what happens. Def home request. So if you remember, this is how we define a function in Python. World from Django.http import this thing. Cool. Cool. That should look good. Just double checking that matches. Why does home take an argument? Miles asked. So the reason home takes an argument is because, it should be spelled request too. The reason home takes an argument is because the controller tells the view what to do. Remember, the view can't act on its own. So the controller sends a request to home, and then this will get updated within the view itself. So for example, if the user is sending data, that'll be passed in the request. Good question. So let's run this and see what happens. I want to go back to the root directory and run Python. Okay, let's see what we have now. Let's refresh the page. Wait a minute, it looks exactly the same. RIP. Okay, what happened? So we created a new urls.py within our Hello World app. However, this doesn't handle the mapping for our entire project. The original urls.py in the root directory does. So Eugene, great question there. And I know it's kind of confusing because they all have the same name. But let's let the root urls.py know about the hello world urls.py and include whatever it's doing. So this is the original urls.py, and we're going to update it to include this thing here, this line here. Why do they have the same name? It's more just for continuation clarity so that we know what each file should do. Like we know the urls.py will always have the URL patterns. So notice we have to use this imports include function, and we add an extra path with all the URLs from the hello world/urls.py. So let's do that right now. So I'm going to hide this again. Pull up our code. This is the urls.py CS196. I'm actually just going to put this over here so we can see it all there. Hello world CS196. Let's get the CS196 urls.py up here. We want to import include as well. Add path, and I forgot the syntax already. Yeah, the home page and include everything from there. So okay, so now that we included this, let me make this a little bigger for us. So now that we included this, we should be able to get everything from the original hello world.py. Is URL patterns a list data type? Yes, that's correct. It's a list data type. We just spread it out to multiple lines to make it easier to read. Is an application in a Django project basically like one page on a website? You could treat it like that, but we usually treat application as one specific functionality. So for example, if we have like a user login page, that could be a separate app because it'll handle all the user login functionality. So this is just for the home page right now. So now let's take a look at what we have here and run it. Oh, we have syntax error. No module named hello world.urls. Of course not, because it's urls.py. Hello world/urls.py. What did I do wrong here? Let's take a look at the original file. One second, all sorry about that. Oh yeah, because we don't want to give the whole path. We want to do a dot there. That's a Django thing. Basically, you treat this like a package and you call that specific file there. My bad. Let's refresh the page here. Oh my gosh, another error. No module named Django. That's a typo somewhere in the views. Okay. Django. All right. Sorry about that, guys. Now when I refresh the page, all right, it says hello world. We got it to work. Awesome. So now we have hello world. Nice. But wait a minute, this isn't dynamic. And also it's trash. Like we only have a single message when we want to make a whole website. So let's do that. Let's start off with that. So first things first, we want to create large dynamic pages. We will have to use templates. And templates are written using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. But we also use the Django template language to make it dynamic. So that's not a separate file. We just add a little bit of extra syntax here and there. So first, let's make a folder called template in our root directory. So I'm going to pull up my folder here. Don't need all these open. Going to go back here in our root directory, get a new folder called templates. Okay. Now we're going to update our settings.py so that it knows where to pull from. So when we open settings.py, it has a lot of information. So what you want to do is Command F, look for templates, and we're going to update the directory so we also include the name of our templates folder. So we use os.path join the base directory, which is the root folder, and then the name of our template there. Hopefully I can remember all of that. So let's open up settings.py within our CS196 folder. Look for template because it has a lot of information there. There's templates. os.path.join baster, I believe. Yeah, baster, and then the file. Which is called templates. All right. That looks good to me. And now let's actually go ahead and create that file. So now we have a templates folder here. Let's go and create something in there. Templates, code, index.html. The reason I called it index is because in a lot of pages traditionally, index is the home page. So if you're familiar with HTML, you know that you can use tags. So I'm going to use the H1 tag to make it big and bold. Hello world, but from a file. File. All right, looks cool. So we're gonna update our hello worlds.views to render this. So I should say views there to render our HTML. So now we updated to say instead of doing HTTP response, we do render and pass our HTML file. So let's do that. So we go back to our views and now we run render, pass in the request because that has to pass into the function, and then index.html. How is this looking now? Let's run the server and find out. Okay. And now it's taking the file instead. So now we have something that could read from a file. Nice again. Now finally, let's make it a dynamic website. So if we want to render a dynamic variable within our app using the Django template language. So let's first update our views.py. So if you remember correctly, our views is what renders dynamic content. So we add an extra parameter here in between the squiggly brackets there. This here is the variable name, so the name, and this is the value that we're going to pass into it. So let's jump back here, add an extra parameter. If this seems like a lot of information, you're getting a little anxious about it, don't worry about it too much because it is a lot, but you don't have to memorize this or anything. Can you explain what render does? I've seen that a lot. Okay, it's a good question, Ricky. So what render is doing is it's taking the index HTML, making it something that the framework can display, and then displaying it. So it's pretty basic. Most browsers can open up the HTML file, but now that we're adding dynamic content, the render will also implement the dynamic content as well. Good question. So let's say CS196 students. All right, that looks good. But now we also have to update our index, or our template, sorry. So we go to index file and see where we had name world before. We're going to replace it with these squiggly brackets and then the variable name. So notice that's what we used here. That's what we're going to pass here too. So let's go back into index, replace this with name, run our server. Oh, it's still running. And let's see what we get now. CS196 students. All right. Now it's working. It's dynamic and it looks cool. But let's see the actual benefit of a framework like this and why we want to use web technologies to make apps. So we're just going to copy some stuff from Bootstrap. So I have that over here. Bootstrap is just an online CSS implementation. It does a lot of like cool stylistic things, and you're more than welcome to use this in your app. I'm just going to copy a bunch of code here and make our app look really cool and show you why we're teaching you this and the benefits of using frameworks. Gonna replace this here with our message. Let's add some more things here. Let's add, I like spinners. Spinners are cool. All right, that's enough for now. Now let's render this and see what happens. It looks a little different. It's using Bootstrap now to make itself look nicer. Let's add one more stylistic thing so it actually looks like we made a change. Oh. Let's replace our hello world with the Jumbotron instead. Gonna take this here and replace it with a big Jumbotron message. And now when we finally render our web page, it looks cool. So the reason I wanted to show that is because I wanted to explain that we don't need to worry too much with the webside of things. HTML, you guys will have to learn a little bit of, but it's very easy to pick up because it's just a markup language. There's no programming involved. It just tells you where things should be. Treated like a Word document or a LaTeX file. And CSS, a lot of CSS style can be found online on things like Bootstrap, Angular, React, etc. So someone asked, isn't this just HTML, CSS, JavaScript with a tiny bit of Django? That's exactly correct. This is just a tiny bit of Django to make things dynamic and to add extra features. But what's great about Django is that we can add even more on top of that to do stuff like server-side things, create dynamic sites that can do like machine learning in the back end or use Python libraries in the back end, things like that. So this is a very quick intro to Django and the powerful things we can do with it. If you have any questions, drop it in the chat. In the next lecture, we're going to be doing more back-end related things, more Django related things, to show you how we can interact with the database directly, how we can set up databases, and do more powerful things using the Django app. So anyway, that's the whole lecture. If you have any questions, please drop it in the chat, and I'll be more than happy to answer them for you.